Imagine this, you've got a strong property portfolio, you're working hard and the market's looking good, and then boom, life throws you a curveball. Maybe it's the loss of a job, but maybe it's a health issue, or a tenant stops paying rent for months. What now? Look, most property investors panic, but the savvy ones, well, they just lean on their financial buffers, a quiet little fund sitting in the background that buys them something more valuable than money. Time. So welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney Podcast, where we help investors gain clarity amongst the confusion of the many mixed messages regarding our housing markets. And we help them develop financial freedom through strategic property advice and smart money management. In today's show, Brett Warren, National Director of Property at Metropole, and I are going to unpack why a financial buffer isn't just a nice to have, but an essential part of building lasting wealth through property. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney Podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
As I said in the introduction, today we're going to be talking about something that might not be so sexy, but it could be the one thing standing between you and a financial disaster. Yes, I'm talking about having a financial buffer. Now, whether you call it a rainy day fund or an emergency stash or simply a you sleep well at night money, this buffer is the difference between riding out the storms or being forced to sell your investments at the worst possible time. Joining me today is Brett Warren, somebody who's helped hundreds of clients set themselves up not just to grow, but to build a substantial property portfolio with resilience that sees us through the times. Welcome, Brett.
Michael, great to be with you. And yeah, you're right. Look, it's not a sexy thing about talking about a buffer and things like that as well. But I think it's probably one of the most powerful wealth producing tools for, I guess, protecting part of your wealth as well. And I think most investors overlook it. So I'm hoping we get some real practical things out of today. We're going to talk about a few case studies. We're going to also talk a little bit about how you've used your buffer and I've used my buffer. And hopefully that'll give our audience some insights and maybe some things they haven't thought about.
Perfect. Well, let's start with the basics, Brett. When we say a buffer, what do we actually mean?
Well, look, you mentioned before, it's some money put aside, set aside, out of your everyday spending account, your funds and stuff like that. It's also known as a financial buffer, an emergency fund, like you mentioned before. And it's really just giving that flexibility to deal with those kind of unexpected surprises that life kind of picks up. Think a job loss, your interest rate hikes. We've had huge interest rate hikes over the last 6 months, 9 months, I guess. Tenant issues, repairs. It's not there for holidays or furniture or anything like that. It's a bit of a safety net to make sure you're not going into debt. And I guess most of all, making sure you're not having to sell assets. We've spoken many times before about property being so expensive to enter the market and also exit the market. So if you can ride out a 6 or 12 months window and ride out that storm we spoke about, you can get yourself into a better position. And I guess the most important thing, and something I learned from you in the early days, Michael, a buffer actually buys you time, doesn't it?
Yes, Brett. So when we set up our clients with a strategic property plan at Metropole, it's not just about property. It's not just about asset allocation or ownership structures. Finance is important as well. And we've often said property investment's a game of finance with some houses thrown in the middle. And it's not just interest rates or how long the loan is, but it's also the finance, as you correctly said, to buy our clients time, not just property. And if you have that capacity, then it avoids panic decisions. Selling at the wrong time, cashing out an investment too early in the journey, they're all costly mistakes that happen when people haven't got that luxury of time. That's where the buffer gives you time, doesn't it? So just to help our viewers and our listeners who are not familiar with the benefits of having a buffer, Brett, maybe you could just give some examples of when you've seen buffers being used.
Yeah, look, I guess it's got to do with most of the time it's an unexpected event, isn't it? Because we can't plan everything. But I like the way you talk about, I guess, expecting these kinds of things to occur and allowing for them rather than kind of backpedaling and finding things.
Yes.
So I guess the first thing is those unexpected expenses. Life's quite predictable. A financial buffer can help cover things like emergency medical bills or costs or car repairs or home repairs.
So we're talking about a financial buffer here. In general, we're saying a buffer for property investments, but I think we also need a buffer for other life unexpected expenses like you just mentioned. So that's separate to a property buffer, isn't it?
It is separate, and we'll probably talk a little bit about both today. But I guess, first of all, just making sure you've got those buffer there for those unexpected events. We've talked a little bit about you losing your income, losing your job. A buffer can help right at that time. And I was just recently speaking to a lady today who's planning to have children. And obviously, with a family, they're going to drop to one income. So you don't want to get caught out there.
That's
Obviously,
a good
we go
example.
through those recessions too, Michael. I mean, they pop up from time to time, don't they? Those kind of black swan events. And rather than, I guess, having to sell a property or break term deposits, I guess a buffer helps, ruining your long-term plan, and you can kind of get back on course. And I think the biggest thing for me that I learned early on, property can be a stressful game, but a very underrated thing is a buffer, because it actually provides you with peace of mind, knowing you've got that stress. And if something comes on and something happens, you can actually ride that period out. So that's, I guess, the term of the financial buffer. I know we've had the discussion over the years, particularly in the early stages of COVID, Michael. How have you used your buffers in the past?
Well, one other thing I think we should mention that where a buffer can come in handy is when tenants leave, and there's a short period of time where you don't have income coming in, and then you've got to pay your property manager the first couple of weeks' rent as well. And often at those times, there are repairs that have to happen for your property. Even good tenants can, unfortunate personal circumstances, become bad tenants, and then all of a sudden you don't get rent for a while. And boy, is it harder nowadays with the changing residential tenancy legislations, Brett, to actually move them out of their property. And so I've seen a couple of times when people have had a number of months of no rental income coming in, yet there's still the ongoing expenses, aren't there?
There is, and I think with those tenancy laws, it's probably, look, we don't like to talk about it, there's probably a greater chance of that happening, even though it's very low. So a buffer will certainly help that time.
Sure. So I'm sorry, you asked me about how when I've used my buffer.
Yeah.
And I've had times in my personal life, my business life, when cash flow has been challenged. I remember early in the days of setting up Metropole, like any business, there were times when income wasn't there as much to help support the cash flow of my property portfolio. And so I've learned the benefit of buffers. I actually learned that early in the piece, actually in the 19, where I owned a lot of commercial property, too much commercial property, too early in my career, Brett. And I went into the recession we had to have in the early 90s with a 70% loan to value ratio, very comfortable. But commercial properties, which vary and fluctuate in price a lot more, dropped significantly when interest rates went from around 10% to closer to 17%. Yes, they went that high. All of a sudden, commercial property values dropped, and the bank said, sell up. And I said, who to? No one was buying commercial properties at the time. And even one of our big tenants that was a publicly listed company and had been in business for 100 years because of the recession, and it was in the textile industry, went broke. And that's when I learned the importance of having a buffer. I also at that time saw a number of my friends and other business colleagues go broke and go bankrupt because life got tough and they didn't have the cash flow there to help them, to protect them, and they didn't have a buffer because that made things worse. Now, that got me into now always having some money set aside. And I thought going into COVID, I would end up needing my buffer. Again, there were really uncertain times, and it brought me back to the uncertainties of the recession of the early 90s. Interestingly, despite all the changes in legislation, despite having difficulty getting people in and out of properties, I didn't have any trouble with any tenants. I had some commercial tenants that didn't pay as much rent. That was the legislation, but I got through. And our joint business, Metropole, interestingly, was able to help our clients, and so the cash flow worked there too. But I've had periods where interest rates have gone up, like more recently, and boy, was it nice to have buffers in place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brett,
I think
what
that's a good
about
point.
you?
Yeah, look, it really helped me early on when I started investing. And, look, I was holding 2 properties. I was living paycheck to paycheck, and all of a sudden interest rates come up and I was out of pocket quite considerably, and I didn't really understand what I was going to do. I started racking up a little bit of credit card debt and things like that as well. And then all of a sudden I understood about buying time and took some of that equity out. I think I was short about $10,000 a year from memory, Michael, back in those days. And I managed to, release some equity and refinance. And that bought me about 5 years. I had about 50,000 there. So that bought out that time. And at the end of the 5 years, my portfolio had grown considerably. I'd got through that period. My rents had actually caught up. So it was actually a cash flow neutral position. And then I could actually switch it over to principal and interest and actually start some of that debt reduction. Or I had the option to purchase another asset, which I actually did. So it was a lot of stress during that time also, but it also saved me selling a property, because at the time I was investing in Perth, where I'm from, and it was early 2000. And if I'd have sold one of those properties, I probably would have missed out on about 50% growth. So I was able to get through that period, and I could sleep at night at the end of the day.
Goes back to what you said earlier on about one of the benefits of the buffer, that peace of mind. It's really unpleasant when you've got to make decisions about, how am I going to meet my financial obligations? What am I going to have to do without? What's the family going to have to do without? So if you have got that on your side, boy, it makes life easier. And we've had many clients also who've had worries about cash flow, and those who've had buffers have slept better. Those who didn't, well, some had to make some decisions they regretted, Brett. So let's get to some practicalities. How much buffer do you recommend when we put a strategy together for clients?
Yeah, look, and it's a really good tool with our software, because we can actually see it once we've plugged in everyone's information and paychecks and what they're earning, and also the mortgages and et cetera, living expenses and cost. We can actually get a figure, which is great, and it'll actually show us. But I know a lot of financial planners talk a little bit about that 6 to 12 month window of, I guess, pretty related expenses. It could be anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000, maybe even more, depending on the rent, the mortgage, the running costs, and things like that as well. But I guess it depends on a few things. First of all, your cash flow position in your current portfolio, the security of your income or job. If you're a contract or you've got permanent work, what are the sources of your income you rely on? I was speaking to someone today who had a side hustle that could top up if they needed to. And I guess the big one's risk. Obviously, the younger you are, I know when I was younger, I was willing to take on a little bit more risk. I didn't have a family. I didn't have those kinds of things to worry about, so I could take on more risk. But my buffer tends to be a little bit more these days, knowing what school fees are like and things like that.
Yes, sure. So I think one of the interesting things you mentioned is the security of your income and how steady it is. So that's where, while a lot of people talk about a fixed amount, 6 months worth, 12 months worth of expenses, financial planners have their own ideas. We've found at Metropole there isn't a fixed amount. Each person's got their different requirements, and that's where having powerful planning software makes a difference, because again, we help people plan for things that they didn't expect. We've been around the block enough times to know where the landmines are, and if we can avoid them, that makes a big difference. Now, this money should be accessible in my mind in the buffer, but it's got to be earmarked for that. You can't go off and buy jet skis or go on a holiday with it.
I think they call that discipline, Michael. Look, it's nice when you've got a $50,000 pool sitting there, isn't it? And you see a nice shiny new car or something. So you do have to be disciplined.
Yeah. Now, again, we can't give financial advice because we don't know the listeners, the viewers' circumstances, but I know that many of our clients leave their buffer in an offset account linked to their home loan. What that means is it reduces the interest on their non-deductible home loan, a non-tax deductible home loan. So that's probably a better place to have it than but you've got to set the loans up correctly so that you don't run into tax problems at the end of the year and taint property business and personal expenses in the one account. But it should be there and only used in an emergency. And some people say, yeah, but it's not good use of the money. No, it's not the highest and best use of every cent that you've got, but boy, does it come in handy when you need it.
Well, I think in the last 5 years, not many people would have needed it, and they'll probably be a bit lax on that. But I'm suspecting that in the next 5 years, it may come in handy. And as you always say, it's better to be there rather than get to that particular point and not have it there.
Brett, let's make this real. I remember you and I have helped many clients over the years set up or, in fact, rebuild their buffers. But I actually want to share a story of, let's call him John, one of our clients. John was in his middle 50s. He owned his own home. He actually had very little debt against his own home, but he also had a solid property portfolio, but didn't pay attention and hadn't built a buffer. And he was actually thinking of taking a year off work, and he came to our property strategists and had the idea of selling a property to fund that. But instead, by showing him good finance strategies, we actually helped him refinance his properties and against his home and create $100,000 buffer that brought him the lifestyle he wanted without sacrificing his long-term growth. Again, you've got to be careful. You can't borrow for personal expenses, living expenses off your property portfolio. Well, the answer is you can, but boy, it mixes up is at the end of the year, and it's very complicated for tax purposes. But since he had a lot of equity in his home, he was able to borrow that. That's not tax deductible. In other words, if he borrows, let's say $100,000, he's got to pay $9,000 in for $6,000, but it leaves him with $94,000 to live off. And at the end of the year, his home has gone up, and in the end of 2 years, it's probably gone up more than he's borrowing, and he's still in a good position, and he's still got his property portfolio.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a great position to be in. And, you just talk a little bit about their buying time and taking some pressure off and setting him up. And, I know that property's done particularly well in the last couple of years because of that COVID period. So it's certainly worth paying the $6,000 interest to probably get 10 times, 15 times that amount out of his portfolio.
Sure. Okay, what about an example that you've had, Brett?
Yeah, the one I had recently was a first-time investor, Michelle. She was quite nervous. We did all the calculations for her, looked at her budget, and she didn't want to spend more than $10,000 out of pocket. She looked at her budget, and when we came back, once we pulled all the information together, it was going to cost her about $20,000 per annum.
To hold an investment property.
To hold the investment property each year, yeah, which was a little bit out of her comfort zone. And because of that, she was actually looking at focusing more on cash flow. And there's opportunities to get $10,000 positive and all the rest of it. But we went and did the numbers and talked around it and talked a little bit about the fundamentals. And we were able to, I guess, restructure the loan, come back to interest only. We found a more affordable property, and we ended up creating a $40,000 buffer, and that allowed her to, I guess, hold the property for another 4 years and buy 4 years of time where she could actually hold that property during that period for the next 4 years. Now she's like full of confidence. She's got that 4-year cushion. Obviously, over that time, the rents are going to catch up and things will change during that time as well. She's in a job where she's getting regular promotions. So she's got that peace of mind, and she's bought into a market that's really moved quite well this year. And I think she's probably made her buffer back in a 12-month period, whereas if we had have focused on those outer areas, regional areas, she probably would, although she may have had $10,000 positive cash flow, she would have had no growth at all.
Well, I guess that's an example of having a finance strategy. And to us, finance strategy isn't the lowest interest rates, but using your money smartly. And again, as we've mentioned a couple of times, it's not using every last cent. Sometimes if you've got the borrowing capacity, you only borrow or use up 90%, 95% of it and have the rest as a buffer to see you through. But not having a buffer, as we've said a few times, creates risks. It creates mental stress, Brett.
It does. I can attest to that. In my early days, with the ability not to be able to find extra additional money to I guess, make that gap is, leaves you awake at night and wonders how you're going to sleep at night. And sometimes, like I said, I racked up a bit of credit card debt to kind of cover that. So it's really, really important that we get that right.
Well, to be fair, I remember when I went through those challenging times in the 1990s, took out a couple of extra credit cards just to help see me through. And I've always had those. So I've got one with a particular bank that I don't do any banking with, and it still sits in my drawer back there.
Which drawer was that one, Michael?
I don't need it. I've got my buffers elsewhere, but they've never asked for the credit card back. They've never made any fuss that I haven't used it. So it's an extra buffer. Yes, that's an expensive form of buffer. And that was when, like you, I did it in retrospect because I didn't have another alternative. What you and I are talking about is thinking in advance and planning, because it's not as easy to do it nowadays, is it?
No, it definitely isn't. It definitely isn't.
So if somebody's listening to this and doesn't have a buffer, what should they do?
Look, I think they should just start small. I guess refinance, redraw if you've got equity. Now's a good time to do that, especially potentially in the next couple of weeks with interest rates coming down this year at some stage as well. Maybe look at switching to interest only to buy some more time, bank those savings, put into offset accounts. And look, if you're looking at another purchase, maybe you don't go all out. Maybe you don't spend all your savings and spend all your money to maximize yourself out. You come back a little bit, you keep a bit of a buffer in place, you reduce the deposit, the stamp duty, all those kinds of other things where you can actually create a buffer.
And I think what you said is a good point that some people may have missed. You don't need to build your full buffer instantly straight away, but make it a priority before the next market shock, before the next upset, before the next tenant challenge catches you off guard. So if you gently build it. Now, again, a lot of people are lazy with their finance. It's difficult. It's a lot of paperwork to swap, but if you go to a particular bank, they're not going to tell you that the bank down the road with a different color logo is going to give you a better deal. That's why we believe seeing a proficient finance strategist helps you and will find you the best deal. And banks are still comfortable with interest-only payments. That makes a big difference in your weekly, monthly cash flow, doesn't it?
It does, and it can be a hard thing to wrestle against, can't it? Because you're always taught to pay down debt, and it's not good debt, and you've got to pay it off. But I think it's more importantly to hold those kinds of assets over these periods, and then once everything catches up later on, then there's the opportunity to consolidate and pay down debt.
So wrapping up, a financial buffer isn't just about protecting yourself from risk. It's buying time to think, time to hold, time to let your portfolio do its job, what you initially employed it to do. So Brett, thanks for the time. Again, as we said at the beginning, maybe not a sexy topic, but I hope it's going to help some of the listeners, some of the viewers set themselves up with a moat around their portfolio to protect themselves.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really important time to do that because you don't want to get caught off guard. It's not the person who buys the most properties the fastest. It's the one who can hold them the longest. And that's part of what we talked about today. And a buffer will certainly help you do that.
Well, Brett, in the last little while, the RBA has made its move. It's actually signalled that the tide has turned. And those paying attention know exactly what that means. We're now, in my mind, at the beginning of the next stage of the property cycle, what you and I have spoken about a few times, a property super cycle. If you think about it, interest rates are falling. Labor's new policies are supercharging demand. And boy, is that going to start happening in January next year when first home buyers are going to be able to buy with 5% deposit. Our population growth is booming, yet supply remains critically low, and we know construction can't keep up. Look, in every previous cycle, moments like this have created generational opportunities, but only for those who have acted. So if you're listening to this, watching Brett and me, and you're waiting for the right time to invest, this could be the right time for you. I don't know your personal circumstances, but because when the next couple of rate cuts roll through, and they will, confidence is going to keep flooding back into the market, competition is going to heat up, and then if you get in the market, you're going to be paying tomorrow's prices. So you can sit back and watch it happen, or you can position yourself to benefit now. And that's where we come in. At Metropole, we've helped investors for over 3 decades, people like you, safely build and protect their wealth through every property cycle over these last decades. So I'm recommending that you have a complimentary wealth discovery session with one of the wealth strategists at Metropole. We're going to help you clarify your goals, understand what some of these macroeconomic shifts are going to do to your personal position. And if you allow us, we can help you create a personalized investment strategy that's much, much more than just finance, like Brett and I were talking about. And we're going to help you take advantage of the turning point before the market surges. So book your free wealth discovery session by going to metropole.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show notes, metropole.com.au, and organise a time for a complimentary wealth discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists. Let's help you plan ahead of the curve, not behind it when everyone else is already in the market. That's because in my mind, in 6 to 12 months' time, you're either going to look back and feel confident you moved early, or you're going to be frustrated that you missed the window of opportunity that others have had. So, Brett, I know your team have been helping a lot of clients. There's been a huge increased interest. People are telling that the market's moving.
They are. And Michael, a lot of the noise has gone, hasn't it? You mentioned before about the election and interest rates, the long weekends. I really think once we get through this next couple of weeks, there's going to be a smooth back end of the year with some more Labor policies and things coming in as well. And, I do believe that we're getting that consumer confidence ticking up. There's more business confidence. So it'll be a smoother process. So don't wait for everyone else to act. Now's an opportunity just to, like you said, just to see where the goalposts are and see what opportunities are in front of you.
Look forward to catching up with you again next week, Brett.
Likewise. Thanks, Michael.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset message, I want to tell you to let go of the boat. What's Michael on about? Let me explain. The idea came from a deceptively simple tale that hits you right between the eyes. A man sets out on a long journey and comes across a wide, fast-moving river. With no bridge and no path around it, he chops down a tree and builds a small, sturdy boat, and it carries him safely across the rushing waters. On the other side, he continues moving on, but he thinks, hey, what if there are more rivers ahead? I'd better take the boat with me, just in case. So he hoists it on his back and begins dragging it along his path. But the boat's heavy, the terrain's rough, and after an hour he's exhausted, barely much further along in his journey at all, actually. And eventually he realizes what we all, I guess, so often forget. The boat was meant to carry him across the river, not to be carried with him beyond it. So my question to you in this mindset message is, what are you still carrying? I guess the boat's a metaphor for life. We all build boats, tools, beliefs, coping mechanisms, relationships, habits that help us get through challenges. And in those moments, they're essential. Sometimes even life-saving, I guess. But here's the mistake we all make at some point. We keep carrying the boat long after we've crossed the river, out of habit, out of fear, out of scarcity, out of doubt that we could ever build another one. We become so attached to the one thing that served us that we fail to notice it's now holding us back. So is it time for you to let go of something? Let me ask you, what beliefs are you still clinging to that no longer reflect who you are? What habit helped you survive for a season but now sabotages your progress? What relationships, identity, or story are you dragging behind you because you're afraid to leave it behind? It might be a mindset that protected you when times were tough. Or it may be a fear that kept you cautious when cautious was wise. It could be a way of doing business that worked once but doesn't serve your future vision. But now the boat is slowing you down. So releasing something that once worked takes courage. It requires trusting that the next time you come to a river, you're going to be able to build a new boat, that you've grown stronger, smarter, more resilient. You're not the person you were when you built that last boat. It means that you're going to have to stop dragging it behind you as proof. So my message for you today in this slightly longer mindset message is, your past tools got you so far, but they're also not meant to come with you. So the question simply is, what boats are you still carrying? Let them go. Free up your energy and walk forward lighter, faster, because the journey ahead needs this version of you, not the one clinging to the past. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. But before you move on to the next podcast you're going to listen to, let me remind you I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher. We call that Demographics Decoded, where Simon and I unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. In my mind, this is a must-listen-to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, but also for business people and entrepreneurs. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, just please stop for a second and subscribe on your podcast app where you're listening to this, or on YouTube. And of course, if you don't subscribe to this show, the Michael Yardney Podcast, why not click the link that says follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now. So twice a week, you're going to get benefit from my guests and me. And I'd like to ask you a little favour, please. If you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody who would also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney Podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Or just tell them about it. Just have a chat with them. Now, I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing me a favour in my quest to help as many people as possible to become financially literate. And by the way, I've got a special bonus for you. As my way of saying thank you for subscribing, just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. It's just my way of saying thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember, the information that we give you in this podcast is general information, not specific information about your personal circumstances, because we don't know about them. But if you do want specific information, you can always have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au. If you really want to learn more, you can always listen to the previous podcast, the many episodes we've already published. Just go back to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success, and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney Podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?